Before humans ruled the Earth, armored giants still walked the Ice Age. The massive Glyptodon emerged like a living mountain through the freezing fog. One of them moved like a living fortress, encased in an impenetrable dome of interconnected osteoderms. This remarkable giant pushed heavily across the muddy terrain. Its armor protected it from a brutal prehistoric world. Composed of thousands of interlocking bony plates, this incredible shell shielded it from deadly Pleistocene predators. Every movement carried enormous weight. Weighing up to 2,000 kilograms, its stout, clawed feet pressed deeply into the wet, yielding ancient ground. Few predators dared to attack it. As it crossed the dark, open plains beneath gathering storms, its sheer size and armor made it a nearly invincible target. Its body carried the marks of survival. Covered in deep scratches, packed mud, and heavy wear, the rosette-patterned shell told the silent story of its long life. Even hunters respected its defenses. Lethal predators like saber-toothed cats were forced to watch cautiously, knowing their teeth could not pierce the massive, thick carapace. Its armor became its greatest weapon. As howling winds intensified across the plains, the giant lowered its heavy body into an immovable, protective armored dome. It was built to endure the Ice Age. Reaching up to 2 meters long, this evolutionary marvel outlasted millions of years of extreme, unpredictable climates. But survival would not last forever. Every labored breath turned to vapor in the freezing air, signaling the quiet vulnerability of a magnificent giant. The Earth seemed to feel its presence. Supported by short, weight-bearing limbs, the muddy ground trembled under this heavily armored tank of the ancient grasslands. It belonged to an ancient world now lost. Turning its colossal frame slowly beneath the darkening skies, the Glyptodon commanded a brutal, fading wilderness. And like many giants, its end was coming. Standing alone as a stark silhouette against a storm-filled sunset, the era of megafauna was steadily closing. Even armor could not stop extinction. As distant lightning briefly illuminated its unyielding plates, it became clear no fortress could defend against catastrophic environmental changes. To understand why, we must return to its world. As the heavy footsteps faded quietly into the thick prehistoric fog, its ancient story finally awaits. Glyptodon lived in a cold and unforgiving world. Stretching across Pleistocene South America, the vast freezing plains tested the endurance of every creature residing there. The Ice Age shaped every part of the landscape, from the lowland pampas to the towering Andean mountains. The bitter climate forged an extreme wilderness. Walls of ice controlled the climate itself, as temperatures fluctuated wildly between humid and dry cycles. Freezing winds swept relentlessly across the open prehistoric continent. Life moved constantly in search of food and survival. Great herds of ancient mammals migrated tirelessly across the steppe, driven by an endless, desperate hunger. Only the strongest animals endured these conditions. With icy winds violently sweeping across the dry, sparse vegetation, survival demanded incredible resilience and unique physical adaptations. Here, the armored giant found its place. Weighing up to 2,000 kilograms, the magnificent Glyptodon walked steadily and confidently through the freezing, muddy terrain. Its world shifted between woodland and vast plains. This armored titan thrived on the edges of sparse forests and expansive, semi-arid, Patagonian-like grassy plains. Low plants and roots became important food sources. It relied heavily on its wide muzzle and strong jaws to bulk feed on tough grasses and hardy shrubs. The ecosystem was filled with prehistoric giants. It shared these frosty plains with towering ground sloths, massive ancient bears, and unusual hoofed mammals like Macrauchenia. Danger remained part of everyday survival. Lethal predators like saber-toothed cats and giant wolf-like canids moved quietly through the thick fog, always seeking vulnerable prey. Even armored animals could not ignore threats. While feeding calmly on the low vegetation, it constantly monitored the silent, freezing horizon for hidden, approaching dangers. The environment could change without warning. The Pleistocene skies were highly unpredictable, frequently shifting from pale sunlight to violent, freezing storms over the open plains. Water became essential for life. Fast-flowing prehistoric rivers cutting through the frost became desperate gathering points for every giant herbivore struggling to stay alive. Its heavy body demanded constant energy. It approached the muddy riverbanks with cautious, heavy steps, fully aware that predators frequently lurked near the vital water. Much of the Ice Age world felt endless. Wandering across the vast, sweeping terrain, the massive armored creature frequently found itself entirely isolated and alone. Its appearance helped it disappear into the environment. Covered in mud and dust, its giant rosette-patterned shell perfectly mimicked the earth tones of the plains. For thousands of years, this balance survived. The climate, predators, and armored giants formed a brutal but perfectly adapted ecosystem that seemed like it would last forever. But the Ice Age world was beginning to change. Deep invisible shifts in the global climate would soon fracture this frozen kingdom and threaten every giant. Glyptodon was built for defense. Standing resolute beneath the dark, heavy skies, its entire massive anatomy was perfectly engineered to repel the deadliest Ice Age attacks. Its shell acted like a natural fortress, composed of nearly 2,000 interlocking, bony osteoderms. This massive rosette-patterned dome provided an impenetrable barrier against predators. Layered armor protected vulnerable areas of its body. Illuminated by cold light, these thick polygonal bony plates even covered its skull like a robust helmet. Its powerful limbs carried immense strength. Supported by thick graviportal legs, this incredible prehistoric titan could successfully bear up to 2,000 kilograms of weight. Strong claws helped it gather food from the ground. Though not designed for deep burrowing, its stout claws tore effortlessly through muddy soil to reach roots. It moved slowly, but with stability, pushing its heavily armored bulk through the rough terrain. It favored unstoppable endurance over any sudden bursts of speed. Even its tail became part of its defense. Protected by interlocking bony rings that ended in a heavy blunt tube, it dragged across the wet earth. Most predators avoided direct attacks. Even fierce saber-toothed cats hesitated nearby, observing cautiously because their lethal fangs could not pierce the thick, unyielding shell. Its armor turned survival into endurance. By lowering its massive body tightly against the ground, it became an immovable fortress, shielding its softer underbelly from strikes. The giant shell dominated its entire body. Reaching up to 2 meters in length, this towering dome was a monumental triumph of Pleistocene evolutionary design. Its shell recorded years of survival. Covered in deep scars and fractured osteoderms, these lasting damage marks told a silent story of violent prehistoric encounters. But such protection came with limitations. As cold breath surrounded its heavily shielded face, the enormous weight of its bony armor restricted both agility and speed. Its massive body required enormous energy. Each heavy footstep left a deep track in the mud, demanding constant, exhausted foraging just to fuel its internal furnace. Every feature evolved for harsh conditions. The remarkably thick skin and rough textures tucked beneath its armor were perfectly adapted to endure the biting Ice Age winds. It was built to endure the ancient world, standing like a defiant stone monument against the strong, howling wind. It calmly outlasted the freezing cold. Its size alone intimidated many threats, casting a giant silhouette next to the smaller prehistoric animals nearby. It commanded deep respect from many hungry hunters. But no defense is perfect forever. Moving slowly beneath the dark, storm-filled sky, it was completely unaware that a rapidly changing climate would soon shatter its kingdom. Even armored giants can disappear. Standing proudly in the dark prehistoric landscape, this magnificent living tank was slowly but inevitably marching toward its own tragic extinction. Each day began with the search for survival. As dawn broke over the freezing pampas, the giant herbivore stirred to face the bitter elements. Its slow movement conserved valuable energy. Like most giant xenarthrans, it possessed naturally low energy requirements, taking deliberate, heavy steps across the wet grasslands. Most of its life centered around feeding. Using its stout, digging claws and wide muzzle, it bulk-fed constantly on whatever rough vegetation it uncovered. It survived on grasses, roots, and rough vegetation. Its specialized jaws effectively ground down tough, fibrous plants gathered closely from the frozen Ice Age soil. Its massive body required constant nourishment. To fuel a 2,000-kilogram frame, this armored titan spent countless hours grazing peacefully beneath the pale winter sunlight. But even armored giants stayed alert. Pausing its meal, it used its senses to scan the silent, shifting environment for approaching danger. Danger never fully disappeared. Giant bears like Arctotherium and predatory cats constantly stalked the foggy terrain, watching closely for any sign of weakness. It traveled carefully through changing landscapes. Forced to follow shifting vegetation, it migrated slowly across the harsh, semi-arid plains to secure its next meal. Every step carried tremendous weight. Its short, graviportal limbs pressed deeply into the muddy ground, supporting the monumental burden of its towering bony shell. Water shaped many of its movements. Traversing the dry grasslands, the Glyptodon was naturally drawn to essential rivers shared by countless other prehistoric giants. Even peaceful moments required awareness. While drinking cautiously beside the muddy riverbank, the heavy beast knew it was exposed to ambushes from unseen predators. Much of its life was spent in solitude. Like modern armadillos, these heavily armored wanderers often crossed the vast, open prehistoric wilderness entirely on their own. Rest helped preserve energy in difficult conditions. Finding shelter beneath sparse, scattered Ice Age trees, the exhausted creature hunkered down to survive the elements. The environment constantly tested survival, with sudden storms sending freezing wind and blinding snow sweeping across the plains. Simply enduring the night was a victory. Endurance became its greatest strength. Protected by remarkably thick skin beneath its shell, it continued to graze steadily through the most punishing, harsh weather. Its world moved slowly and quietly. As fading evening light stretched across the prehistoric grasslands, the massive herbivore continued its endless, quiet rhythm of survival. But survival also depended on protecting the next generation. Occasionally, a mother could be seen gently guiding her highly vulnerable offspring through the frost. The young relied heavily on protection. With its armor still developing and softer than an adult's, the small calf stayed tightly beside its massive mother. Its shell became a moving shield, using her colossal dome-like body as a living barricade. The mother bravely shielded her young from lurking predators. Life continued despite the dangers around them. In these rare, quiet family moments, the immense beauty of the brutal prehistoric ecosystem was laid completely bare. Most of existence returned to silence and endurance. As calves successfully matured, these heavily armored titans inevitably returned to their solitary, slow march across time. But the Ice Age balance was beginning to break. Beyond the calm prehistoric horizon, irreversible climatic shifts were gathering that would soon destroy this kingdom. The future of the species depended on very few offspring. Like many giant Pleistocene mammals, their slow reproductive rates made their isolated populations incredibly fragile. From birth, survival was uncertain. Young calves possessed softer, developing cephalic shields and armor, leaving them highly vulnerable to sudden attacks from Ice Age predators. Raising even one offspring required time and energy. A mother dedicated years of constant vigilance to guide her calf across the treacherous, semi-arid South American plains. Their populations were spread across enormous distances. From the lowland pampas to the high Andean mountains, these armored families roamed across a vast, unforgiving continent. As numbers declined, isolation increased. Finding a mate across these sweeping, empty territories became a monumental challenge, making it nearly impossible to rebuild shrinking populations. Finding food became more difficult. As the climate shifted, the expansive open grasslands they depended on began to shrink, forcing the heavy giants to travel further. The Ice Age ecosystem was beginning to disappear. Fluctuating temperatures were slowly replacing their familiar grazing plants with tougher vegetation and expanding woodlands they couldn't easily consume. Its heavy body needed constant nourishment. To fuel a 2,000-kilogram frame, the exhausted titan was forced to desperately scrape barren earth for any remaining roots. The next generation faced harsher conditions. Struggling to keep pace beside the adult, the young inherited a deteriorating world where basic foraging demanded overwhelming effort. The environment became less predictable, alternating rapidly between humid and dry cycles. The shifting South American climate relentlessly tested the physical limits of these ancient beasts. Food shortages weakened survivors. Forced to forage across increasingly barren terrain, these specialized bulk feeders could no longer gather enough calories to maintain their heavily armored bodies. Small populations struggled to recover. When an isolated adult succumbed to starvation or extreme weather, the loss sent irreversible shockwaves through the fragile, slowly reproducing species. Its endurance could no longer guarantee survival. Evolutionary traits that had successfully shielded the species since the late Eocene were unable to keep up with rapid climatic changes. Even armor showed signs of hardship. Deeply scarred and bearing fractured osteoderms, their magnificent rosette-patterned shells carried the physical toll of a collapsing prehistoric ecosystem. The age of giants was fading. Alongside massive ground sloths and towering bears, the great armored Glyptodon found itself quietly slipping away from a shifting landscape. Its world was becoming smaller each year. Standing solitary beneath a darkening sky, this ancient living fortress was tragically cornered by the inescapable forces of climate change. Extinction was approaching slowly. There was no single catastrophic event, just an agonizing, quiet fade as the plains were permanently emptied of their most heavily armored inhabitants. And soon, a greater threat would arrive. As relentless storm clouds gathered over the isolated survivors, an entirely new, highly intelligent predator was about to appear. Then the Ice Age began to end. Following the Antarctic cold reversal, global temperatures rose rapidly, bringing melting snow and an increasingly humid climate. Ancient ecosystems started collapsing. The familiar dry environments shifted, causing crucial C3 grasses to be quickly replaced by tougher C4 grasses and spreading southern beech forests. The world it depended on was changing rapidly. Forced out of their specialized grazing niches, these heavy armored giants wandered through an unfamiliar, increasingly wooded landscape. Survival became harder with every season, as extreme climatic fluctuations alternated between humid and dry cycles. The reliable food sources they needed to survive dwindled drastically. Its massive body demanded more energy than ever before. Sustaining up to 2,000 kilograms required constant foraging, pushing the exhausted herbivore to its physical limits. But climate was no longer the only danger. Around 16,000 years ago, early hunter-gatherers arrived on the continent, bringing an unprecedented threat to the megafauna. A new predator had entered the Ice Age. Armed with primitive spear points and stone tools, these highly intelligent hunters targeted the slow-moving giants of the plains. Humans learned to follow giant animals across great distances. From the Argentine Pampas to northwestern Uruguay, footprints left in the mud became clear paths to giant prey. Its armor made attacks difficult, but not impossible. While the thick carapace could deter a saber-toothed cat, it could not perfectly protect them from coordinated human tactics. Unlike natural predators, humans hunted with strategy. Evidence shows they targeted vulnerable skulls and eviscerated carapaces, sometimes even using the massive shells as shelters from bad weather. The young became especially vulnerable. Still bearing softer, developing armor, calves were much easier targets for hunters who used tools to exploit their incomplete defenses. Over time, survival became constant pressure. For thousands of years, the slow-reproducing Glyptodon faced relentless anthropogenic hunting pressure across a rapidly changing South American continent. Each loss weakened the species further. Because they produced very few offspring, every hunted adult sent irreversible shock waves through the increasingly fragile and isolated population. Climate change and hunting created a deadly combination. The drastic environmental collapse paired with human predation drove South American extinction rates to the highest of any continent. Safe places became increasingly rare. Pushed into shrinking habitats and stripped of their natural grazing lands, the armored giants had nowhere left to hide from early Paleo-Indians. The balance that protected armored giants was collapsing. The prehistoric world that had successfully supported their evolution for millions of years was now unraveling into an empty wilderness. Its armor could not stop extinction. A living fortress built to endure predators and ice was completely powerless against the rapid arrival of the Holocene epoch. And the end was drawing closer. Driven by a volatile climate and a deadly new predator, the majestic era of the armored megafauna was tragically fading into the fog. By now, the armored giants were disappearing. The once thriving megafauna populations of Pleistocene South America had been dramatically reduced by a rapidly changing world. The land remained, but the giants were fading. Sweeping across the pampas, the cold winds now blew over increasingly empty, silent, and unfamiliar grasslands. The final survivors crossed a dying world. Weighing nearly 2,000 kilograms, this lonely giant marched through the thick fog, entirely isolated from its kind. The remaining populations were scattered and weak, thinly distributed from the lowlands to the high Andes. Finding a mate became a nearly impossible task. Even survival could no longer protect the species. Their incredibly slow reproductive rates meant the devastating losses they suffered could simply never be replaced. Each passing trail became harder to find. As the heavy tracks filled quietly with rainwater, the presence of the great armored beasts slowly vanished. Silence slowly replaced the age of giants, where towering ground sloths and massive armadillos once roamed together. An eerie quiet settled over the continent. Food shortages weakened the last survivors, with essential C3 grasses replaced by spreading southern beech forests. These specialized bulk feeders slowly starved in the changing ecosystem. The Ice Age world was collapsing around them. Extreme rapid fluctuations between dry and humid cycles fractured the delicate balance that had sustained them. And human pressure never disappeared. Newly arrived Paleo-Indian hunters continuously targeted the remaining megafauna, pushing the heavily armored but exhausted survivors to their limits. Each survivor carried the future of the species alone. Crossing the open plains at sunset, this solitary wanderer was among the very last of its ancient lineage. But there were too few left to recover. After millions of years of successful evolution, their numbers had finally fallen below the threshold of survival. Its long fight for survival was ending. Staring into the fading Pleistocene light, the heavy toll of a collapsing environment was reflected in its tired eyes. The giants of the Ice Age vanished one by one. Across the Americas, the Great Extinction Wave mercilessly erased the largest mammals from the sprawling landscape. Extinction was no longer avoidable. Standing completely motionless in the creeping silence, the last living fortress could not defend itself against the shifting global climate. The end had finally arrived. Dark, heavy storm clouds rolled across the horizon, casting a permanent shadow over a species that had successfully endured for ages. One by one, the survivors disappeared. The magnificent armored silhouette faded slowly into the heavy fog, swallowed entirely by the sweeping, unstoppable changes of the Holocene. Then none remained. Around 11,000 years ago, the final heavy footsteps ceased, leaving the vast South American continent completely devoid of these incredible creatures. The extinction was complete. The once vibrant and crowded Pleistocene ecosystem was now empty, permanently stripped of the magnificent armored beasts that had long defined it. The Earth moved on without them. The relentless wind blew across the abandoned terrain, sweeping through the new forests and grasses that the giants would never see. But something ancient had been lost forever. The great armored beasts of the Glyptodon tiny subfamily, an evolutionary marvel spanning back millions of years, were gone. A species millions of years in the making was gone. The incredibly specialized rosette-patterned shells and heavy defensive architecture had been entirely erased from the living world. No movement, no return. A frozen stillness dominated the vast plains, marking a permanent, tragic end to the majestic reign of the prehistoric walking fortresses. Only traces remained behind. The deep, heavy footprints pressed into the muddy ground were slowly washed away forever by the relentless, driving Holocene rain. The age of armored giants had ended. The fierce Ice Age storms faded over the plains, leaving behind a fundamentally altered and quietly transformed South American continent. And the world continued without them. The sun rose steadily over an emotional, empty wilderness, completely indifferent to the spectacular megafauna that had just slipped into extinction. Nature slowly erased the last signs of their existence. A soft, gentle snowfall covered the last remaining tracks, burying their ancient story deep within the frozen earth, leaving behind only silence and memory. The endless horizon faded slowly into darkness, preserving the magnificent Glyptodon only in the deep fossil record of the past. After extinction, the world continued in silence. Following the end of the Pleistocene epoch around 11,000 years ago, the South American continent was forever altered, but the giants never returned. The magnificent megafauna that had dominated these plains for millions of years were entirely wiped out by a shifting climate and new predators. Today, only fragments of their existence remain, found along ancient riverbanks from Uruguay to Argentina. Their massive fossilized shells are all that is left of these incredible beasts. Armor once built for survival now rests in stone, composed of thousands of interlocking bony osteoderms. The once impenetrable rosette-patterned carapaces are now silent, fossilized relics. Through fossils, their story slowly returns. First uncovered in the early 19th century, these extraordinary bones initially puzzled scientists, who confused them with armored ground sloths. From living fortress to memory. Thanks to the meticulous work of early paleontologists like Sir Richard Owen, the true identity of the majestic Glyptodon was finally revealed. Glyptodon became a symbol of the lost Ice Age. Standing today as monumental mounted skeletons in museums around the world, they represent the sheer scale of prehistoric life. Its extinction changed the prehistoric world forever. The permanent loss of these 2,000-kilogram grazers drastically shifted the ecological balance of the ancient South American grasslands. Millions of years of evolution vanished quietly. The highly specialized armor and heavy adaptations of the Glyptodontini subfamily came to a tragic, inescapable, and permanent end. The footprints disappeared, but the warning remained. The rare fossilized trackways left behind in the ancient mud remind us just how fragile even the most heavily armored species can be. In memory, the armored giant still walks the Ice Age. Through ongoing scientific discovery, we can still perfectly picture this living tank peacefully roaming across the freezing steppe. Extinction is never only about the past. The tragic collapse of these magnificent megafauna serves as a profound lesson about the devastating combination of rapid climate change and human impact. Because once a species is gone, it never truly returns. The great armored Glyptodon was a living masterpiece of Pleistocene evolution, lost forever to the depths of deep time.